Good afternoon. I'm Sidney Porter from the Health Physics Society History Committee, and it's my very distinct pleasure to be videotaping a well-known health physicist who's contributed much to the practical field of health physics, and who I'm proud to say has been a friend and colleague of mine for many years, Margaret Reilly, certified health physicist. Margaret has a very rich and varied background, and I'd like to start right off by saying that this is September the 5th, 2002, and we're at the Hershey Medical Center in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And Margaret, how about telling us about your early days?
Okay, well, I was born in Lebanon, Pennsylvania in December of 1941. You can do your own math. And let's see, I went to local parochial schools. Following high school, I went to College of Misericordia, got a BS in chemistry, and my first job was with the state. My first real job was with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in the paint lab at the State Bureau of Standards, which is a kind of weird place to start. One thing I got out of that was I know how to hold a paintbrush. From there, after about 2 years there, I switched to the Occupational Health Bureau in the State Department of Health in the radiological health section. I, in essence, did a lot of gamma spectroscopy and strontium separations, that sort of thing.
What made you switch?
What, go to?
Yeah, what caused you to switch to go there?
Seemed more interesting. You know, I had spent a lot of time getting used to doing analytical chemistry rather than applied materials testing, although as I said before, I did get a lot out of that, out of the Bureau of Standards. I can write specs that'll knock your socks off. That's another thing I got there. But let's see, the state was involved in environmental surveillance. This is sort of the tail end, or the beginning of the tail end of the atmospheric fallout days. In those days, it was not uncommon to see 50 picocurie per liter strontium in milk and similar concentrations of cesium. So, you know, there was a time when there was stuff out there. After a year or so in the rad lab, as I affectionately called it, really creative, I went to grad school at Rutgers.
What made you do that, by the way?
I didn't want to die at a bench. You know? So, and also the radiation stuff was kind of cool, because I've always been interested in esoteric and obtuse things, as people around me would willingly agree with. And the radiation thing really got my interest. Very shortly after I went with the Rad Health group in Health Department, I was there about a month, and they packed me off to a 2-week training course in basic radiological health at the Robert A. Taft Sanitary Engineering Institute in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was a rather enthusiastic gang. You know, the people teaching it and the people that were there, it was, you know, mostly government type.
Who were your most memorable
people.
teachers?
Floyd Galpin, Bill Properzio. I'm trying to think of some of the others. But in 1965, which was the first full year I was in radiological health in the state health department, I went to 3 courses at Cincinnati, plus I think they brought 1 or 2 on the road to Harrisburg. So man, I was really steeped by this time. In fall of '66, I started at Rutgers. And at the tail end of that, we had 10 weeks of sort of OJT at Brookhaven National Labs. So
who'd you get to know there?
Oh, well, Andy Hall, Charlie
Meinhold,
yep.
Of course.
Oh, geez, I wish I would have written them down. I could have cued myself. Lee Phillips,
Nat?
Mm-hmm.
Nat Greenhouse?
Yeah, well, no, Greenhouse, I think was, I don't know if he was off someplace else or not there yet or whatever. What's his name, Distenfeld, Carl Distenfeld, Charlie Flood, sort of an interesting group to work one's mind on. And after the 10 weeks at Brookhaven, which he did in the Rutgers program, he did that for grade. You know, some of the people from the other grad schools just came and just sort of did it because they had to do the time. At Rutgers, it was 10 credits, I remember, and I thought, man, I better be good at this.
Well, you enjoyed it though, didn't you?
Oh yeah, yeah. Again, it's stuff that you will see there that 95% of it you'll never see again, but it's a matter of making an impression, have something to connect with, and ways of making analogies and things later. Oh, that's like the blah, 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 blah. But anyway, I went back with the state, and things were a lot quieter than I thought they would be when I originally thought I would go into this. Let's see.
Okay, well, you were there for 10 weeks at Brookhaven.
Yeah.
And then when you came back, again, did you have your master's at that
Yeah, I
point?
had a master's degree. Or I was shortly to get at Rutgers degree awarding time. I never could figure that out, but I finished in the fall of '67.
And then did you get a full-time job out of
Yeah, I had a full-time job. I passed civil service. In those days, the civil service test was made up by the same gang that made up the public health service test that they gave to all their fellows going through graduate school. I had a public health service fellowship to go to Rutgers, and I guess it's a quality control thing. PHS tested all its people on the way out. And those questions on those two tests sure look like part one of the certification test. So
I'm sure
it was
they
about just keep doing it till you get it right. But anyway, from let's see, '68. In that incarnation, beginning in '68, it was a matter of eventually organizing environmental surveillance for the then apparently expanding nuclear power activity in the state.
Now, you were working for Tom Jerusalem?
Yeah, I was working for Jerusalem.
And how long had you been working for Tom at that point?
Well, in '68 was when he essentially, late '67, when I came back from grad school, he was my supervisor. The organization was the radiological health section, and there were maybe 6 raddies and a couple of seminars. Yeah, we were. Yeah, it was a part of occupational health. The genealogy of radiation protection in the state is rather interesting. You start out with occupational health, which oddly enough has to do with diseases caused by one's occupation. And a spin-off of that was the radiological health group, because the big interest was radiation protection of workers, and to a great extent this was people delivering x-rays or whatever, things other than licensed nuclear material. But there are plenty of doctors and dentists and veterinarians and chiropractors and different vocations like that around who happen to use ionizing radiation, especially machine-made radiation. So this occupational angle is how come this came out of Occ Health. And then in the early '60s, the matter of atmospheric fallout from atmospheric weapons testing got to be a big thing. And Public Health Service, I believe, made grants to states for buying equipment, and they also made the training available, as I indicated before, you know, the Cincinnati Robert A. Taft Center training courses.
Classes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Really?
I still have the syllabuses from them, and they're still true.
And
you know?
Galpin's gamma spec class is one of the best. I still remember it.
Yeah, yeah. That was another 2-weeker. But
and you worked your tail off. But it was good. It was a good class.
We argued a lot in it. As you can probably tell, I always liked venues where argument was encouraged. Let's see. In the early 60s, PHS was making money available to do this other stuff like environmental surveillance. And in those days, the state had several networks for assessing environmental radiation due to fallout. And this included pasteurized milk network, air particulate filtering, and a big water network. Let's see, this is early 60s, late 60s. Going into, say, 1970 or thereabouts, one of the NRC commissioners mentioned in a press release.
AEC had to be.
Yeah, AEC. This is about 1969 or 70. AEC indicated, well, gee whiz, we're going to give money to the states to monitor reactors. And of course, Tom was always pretty good at finding the money. And anytime he saw a dollar sign in a press release, his eyes just zeroed in on it. And so he and I made a little trip to Washington. I think we may have caught the AEC hierarchy flat-footed because when we went to see them, they didn't know what it was that they were going to maybe pay for. But we got into the contract monitoring, which over the years was good, eventually good for maybe $100,000 a year, which in those days was real money. And this job included an independent surveillance effort by the state, very modest, but it later turned out to be useful. And also some work having to do with compiling effluent data from the utilities. And this went on for the next probably 20-some years. We had that contract going. In 75, I had
When were you put in charge of this group? Do you remember that? The environmental surveillance group.
Oh, it was sort of understood to begin with, although when you're a section, you don't run around calling yourself division chief or anything like that. A section is the lowest subdivision in those days anyway. Around 1971, in keeping with the fashion in the nation at the time, the state organized the Department of Environmental Resources, and they took pieces of what had been environmental health in the health department, ganged it together with a bunch of other things, and we became DER at that point.
And you had your lab with you at that point?
Yeah, we still had the lab.
Because you ran the lab, as I remember.
Well, it was in my group. I think I was named a division chief in there somewhere, but it was kind of odd because the division title was so long that there were more words in it than I had staff. I often thought that was cool. I was one of those assistant associate deputy whiz bang of whatever. And well, anyway, but in '75, as a sidebar, the folks at Brookhaven were looking for cheap labor to go to do some monitoring at Bikini. It's my understanding at the time Brookhaven had the contract for doing the monitoring. And they had this nifty idea. You go find health physicists, also known as ratties, in the hinterlands, and you say, hey, Snooks, if you want to come to Bikini, all expenses paid for 3 weeks, sign here. So I did that, and it was an opportunity to see
the atolls.
Yeah, and to sort of get a sense as to what really went on in the time when atmospheric weapons testing was going on in that part of the world, and also the social ramifications of packing people up and taking them off their ancestral island. That's a whole other story there, but that was interesting. I kind of enjoyed that. It's weird going around
It's a big medical study too. Jim Brennan was involved in that big medical study because he was there when it.
I think at that time they had just found the first I don't know how many, I haven't really, I have to confess I haven't kept up with this, but there was talk of a case of thyroid cancer around the time I went.
We had a lot of skin lesions that they followed for years, terrible beta burns.
Yeah, part of the thing was, there isn't any fresh water there to speak of. There's, and you don't, unless you go for a dip in the lagoon, that's the only way you're going to get clean. And if you go for a dip in the lagoon, you better take your bang stick along to take care of the sharks. It's not quite like downtown Hershey. And also there is no, there isn't any Ramada Inn on Bikini. We stayed on a landing craft that had been kind of reworked a little bit. It was vintage 1946, the good ship Lick Tenor. Lick Tenor was, I guess, the goddess of science, so to speak, in the Bikinian tradition. And there was this lady named Lick Tenor who allegedly invented the sail, and that would be a big thing. They had the double canoed
like
catamarans and a sail, and man, you can make real time using something like that. But I was glad I had the chance to do that because I look at the world. I think I look at the world differently.
That was the early 70s.
That was 1975.
And had you studied for your boards yet?
Well, I took the boards that year. I took it to pass. I actually passed that year. That was a big year.
It was.
I moved,
you were both at Bikini and you took your boards.
Yeah, and I moved and I adopted a cat. Now, how's that for a rounded out
Was that
year?
your first cat?
Yeah. All right.
And what year was that?
That's 75. That's all 1975. That was Cleo.
That was really a busy
Cleo
year.
the First. So,
Cleo the First.
yes.
Okay. And where is she buried?
Oh, actually, she's in a box of ashes in my basement.
Okay.
So she, at one time, the box resided in a bookcase in the living room, but that's another whole other story. Let's see, this is 1975. Things sort of putzed along to the late 70s.
What happened to your environmental monitoring program in that time?
Well, it was not very expansive and all this, but we had stuff everywhere. We had TLDs, we had air samplers, this sort of thing. And
now, did you publish in Red Health Data at that point?
No.
Data?
No, the stuff of ours that would have gone into Red Health Data was the air sampling. We did air sampling on the roof of the Health and Welfare Building. It was a cubic meter a minute air volume.
There's a water station kind of Wingo Dam. Remember that?
I think that belongs to one of the feds, though. I think that's a fed station.
I never understood the difference.
Yeah, I keep thinking there are little networks out there, or there were, that nobody outside the collecting agency knew about. And later they would pop up.
There were in the 40s. Definitely.
Well, but
the whole thing was classified.
For instance, one point in the 70s, on a Saturday morning, Jaruski got a call that FDA had found mixed fission products in milk collected at Peach Bottom, and this is back in the early 70s. And nothing was going on in the world, and the mix of nuclides in this alleged milk sample did not say reactor accident, because there was barium and some stuff in there, which if you have barium and cesium in a milk sample, you should have ID numbers out the yin-yang. And they were all kind of the same. And I remember Drewski sent Don Beaver out on a Saturday morning. It was about 4 degrees. It was January. It was cold. And to go get a milk sample, which of course, if you have something like that and it's real, you should have it tomorrow too. So we got the milk sample and there was nothing in it. What we suspect happened was they stored the milk sample in the refrigerator with some dirt samples. And in those days, gamma spec was done mostly by sodium iodide, which doesn't have the greatest resolution in the world. And there are radon daughters whose gammas sure look like iodine, depending on how you resolve the spectrum. I myself was caught in that trap one time, so I know all about it.
Yeah, you remember.
Never store the dirt with the milk samples. No, 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 no. But anyway, how did I get off on that? That was to indicate that people run networks that we never knew about. I never knew FDA was going around, or HEW rather. Yeah. Same gang, FDA. I didn't know they had a milk network. We weren't collecting it. Whatever. But anyway, things kind of just ambled along until March 28th of 79.
Tell us about your
at which point
involvement there.
it's a good thing that that we had independent monitoring going on. When you have you read everybody's emergency plans, or at least emergency plans in those days, and it says, "Oh, we have an accident. Let's go out and collect the dosimeters." And a lot of entities did that, and they wound up screwing up their TLD data. And they sort of forgot about the real heartache you can get into if you don't handle your TLDs right. And they were, in essence, they were interrupting the observation, because these TLDs were collected when things weren't really over, at least in a socioeconomic or political sense. And we didn't collect them because it was our collection day. Don Beaver and Charlie High were about ready to go, and they said, "Well, what do you want us to do?" I said, "Let them ride." Why I said that, I don't know. I figured that there's going to be something else for them to do, so I didn't want them squandering effort to go out and do this. The TLDs that we had at the time were NRC provided them, and they were read by Idaho Falls. So, and those TLDs are probably the only continuous TLD sample or observation, the only set of continuous TLD observations over the course of the accident. We didn't read them, we didn't collect them until about the 15th of April. So it had the whole shoot match in it. With the accident, Bill Dornsife, our sole nuclear engineer, was the duty officer in those days. We were trying something new. The previous year, sometime in late 78, we said, let's divvy up this emergency duty stuff. And we put all the ratties' names in a hat and drew them out. And in the sequence that you drew your name out, you got the duty for a month. And Dornsife was it for, I think I had November. I was off the plate the previous year. Dornsife had March, and he was gonna revert to Jim Copenhaver on the 1st of April. So Copenhaver has done burnt offerings a lot in from the standpoint of how that worked out. But anyway, I was at home getting ready to go to work, and I hate when the phone rings before you go to work. I mean, that's always bad news, and I hear Bill's little voice saying, "Oh, Maggie, I think we have a problem at TMI, blah, 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 blah." So that got everything off and running. Where do we want to go with this TMI thing?
Well, I think you ought to just talk about what your major involvement was.
Okay. For the first several days were kind of odd. I think in a way I almost stuck to what I had assigned myself for such an event. I had written an emergency plan in 73 for Peach Bottom and did some tweaking to make it suit a TMI pressurized water reactor. But anyway, I in essence coordinated with the lab and coordinated with the other state agencies that had things to do with this. For instance, Department of Agriculture. We had long been cozy with them. There had been an episode of fallout from a Chinese weapons test in the fall of '76, which produced the highest iodine in milk numbers that I've seen. Of course, I wasn't there in the real high days of weapons tests, but
the middle 50s are really high.
Yeah. I mean, you could almost smell iodine. Maybe I'm being facetious.
No,
but anyway, with I think we had one a sample from a farm that was like 400 picocuries per liter, which was a heck of a lot higher than anything we ever saw from TMI or from Chernobyl. But anyway, we were in thick with ag, you know, first name basis and all this. And I think a lot of this stuff really helps you. You know how other people think and how they're going to handle stuff. But ag was pretty good, and we had a lot of dealings with water quality.
I found them difficult, but
Yeah,
they had a lot of pressure on them.
I've recently done some file purging in Bureau Rad protection having to do with accident stuff, and as I go through the water stuff, I want to get out a forklift and take it over and put it on Walt Lyon's driveway. Here, Walter, you deal with it. There's still evil thoughts there.
Okay.
But anyway, you know, they did what they thought they had to do. With air quality, I followed the rule there as part of the plan, and one of the first things I do was call the staff meteorologist in the Bureau of Air Quality. And I talked to Dennis about, Miss Dennis Lohman, who's now with EPA Region Philly. I said, Dennis, we have this problem. What's the outlook for the weather today? And I don't know if he told me outright or he called back. He said, well, it's going to go like this. Wind's currently out of 30 degrees and it should go through a 270 degree shift by this afternoon. Now, people who say, well, we'll just evacuate or do something to the downwind sector, you know, when it's going to go through 270 degrees, forget that. So that the weather conditions on that day and that set of conditions is not really all that weird. That gave rise to the state of Pennsylvania when they redid the plan to meet New Rate 0654. That led to the state being odd and saying, if we do anything in the EPZ, we do it to the whole thing. And
all 360 degrees.
Yeah, just do the whole thing, because for the amount of effort expended by any emergency response unit is the same. You don't have one county going around evacuating everybody. You have each county doing its thing, so it's not overly burdensome. It's not as nasty as it sounds. Plus, we sort of had, or they sort of had the notion that people know how far they live from something, but compasses leave them weird. So, I mean, I have trouble with left and right, so I can see how most females do. But we just do 10 miles all around. Okay, that was the meteorologist. I talked to Ag around the same time. The chief of the Bureau of Milk Sanitation was Bill Faust at the time. And they decided, or we decided between us, that we would start milk sampling that evening, figuring that this accident started at 4 o'clock in the morning, at which time whatever milk was harvested from the cattle, which starts around 5 o'clock, whatever milk was going to be harvested was, as it were, already in the bag. That you could have a really messy thing and you probably wouldn't see it, because you know, the cow's udder was blocked with milk, as it were. So we were going to start that evening where the cow had the opportunity to inhale and ingest whatever it was going to do for the day. So Ag started sampling at the farm that evening. And that went on, extra milk sampling went on probably for all of 79.
Also, you did Mrs. Hardesty's goats.
I don't know that we did them. I know GPU did. And it was again an indication that goats are better accumulators of iodine in terms of milk concentration than cows are, by a factor of about 10. It might be 8.5, but you know, number of fingers on 2 hands, that's easier. And the reason is that goats usually are on pasture and they graze differently from cows.
Yeah,
if you look at their dentition is different.
They'll lick dirt.
Sheep are really good, but then I don't know a lot of people that milk sheep. But anyway, also the goats, from what I understand, metabolize iodine a little differently from cows. But anyway, if you get about 10 to 1 goat over cow, that's okay. On the goat angle, somewhere in there, a goat had either twins or triplets, and had a litter, as it were, of kids, which is really odd. And the mother died. The mother goat died, and there was a lot of uproar, that this was due to radiation. When in reality, she died of eclampsia. That's pregnancy-related kidney, high blood pressure things. But the reason, supposedly, that these goats were having litters rather than 1 or 2 kids was there had been complaints that the fertility of that goat herd was not what it had been. And GPU hired the El Primo goat guy from the University of Pennsylvania veterinary school. And they got a guy whose big thing in this world was goats. And his recommendation to GPU was, just forget it, I'll just get her a new billy, a new male. And evidently, that was the source of the problem. But anyway, he was the cause of having more kids than one ought to.
It was interesting, the kids were born just a few days after the accident.
I remember seeing data for work done on dead birds. In the spring when birds are working over the issue of whose territory is whose, you get some pretty nasty stuff going on. Everybody thinks of birds as sweet, good-hearted souls, when all they're trying to do is to reproduce their genome. And my genome is better than yours, so they fight a lot. Also, they tend to get upset and fly into windows. So several dead birds went out to be inspected. One of them, oddly enough, had tapeworms. I often wonder about that. I've told that to vets, and they say, "Why?" But I think some of them might have been whole bird counted. There was nothing on it, because environmentally, the TMI accident was boring. In terms of environmental radiation anyway. In terms of the reactor building and the auxiliary building and all that was hardly boring. But I always thought if you mess up a core that well, at the beginning they weren't really sure how messed the core was, but eventually, like in 80, 81, that's about when they pulled the head off and looked in and said, "Oh my God!" An awful lot of the fuel had slumped to the bottom, and it was a real mess. And you would think if you could mess up a core that badly, that you would certainly see it in the environment. We did see stuff saying something had gone on, but it turned out that the thing was, it was a wet accident, and on one hand you have nuclear engineers running stuff. But they ought to look into things like chemistry and housekeeping. Like a lot of things, if you have water around, things don't get airborne. Even, say, you assume that the iodine fission product atoms, they want to believe, well, this stuff is going to stay as a gas. But there are all these ions and solvents around. And they would rather do that than waste their time being a gas. So a lot of the iodine is gonna be dissolved in water of its own accord, at which point it's gonna meet all these cesium atoms,
And also
fellow fission products.
And become organically bound.
No. There was in the coolant water you had a cesium iodide forming. So, and once you get it's like trying to get the chlorine gas out of a saline solution. You just can't. You can't move it too well once it's in solution and it's there as a salt. And this was cesium iodide, which is not it's probably more of an ionic, more intensely ionic solution than sodium chloride is. It's that degree of ionness has to do with the size of the atoms involved with it. But anyway, we ran around the first several days. We were really looking for the iodine. I mean, I thought, man, this is the opportunity of a career. We might as well make some lemonade here, and it just wasn't around. And a lot of people, I think, were disappointed that it wasn't, but we really, really tried to find this stuff. Let's see, that's
And Bo, you were working
79.
horrendous hours. I
Oh,
remember
yeah,
that.
yeah, well,
If you and I would talk every 4 hours. It seems
Yeah.
to me we talk every 4 hours for 3 or 4 days.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, and you guys
I
and
was giving you
NRC
the-
headquarters and yeah, other people. On Black Friday, which is the third day of the accident, that will forever live in my heart as, yeah, there are
on the
nasty symbols scattered all around that one, but on that Friday, yeah, we're handling some gas and through a leaking header, and a helicopter, I think that was in the employ of the utility, did a couple of measurements over the vent that it was going out, and they were getting something like 1200 MR per hour, which was not really that big a deal because it's up there, not down here.
Yeah, and they were looking right down the stack.
Yeah,
No,
and the previous day
was
it had
not
been
the-
3 times that.
It was not the utility helicopter, somebody else's.
Okay.
Because it's one of the helicopters that didn't know that they were forbidden to run across.
Well, it was somebody with a meter though, and
Oh, yeah,
I'm
somebody
pretty
with a
sure
meter.
it wasn't DOE, but anyway, this number 1200 MRs floating around, and it was, oh yeah, okay. But at NRC, they had done a back of the envelope calculation as to what kind of ground level gamma levels you may see if they lost the waste gas decay tank. And lo and behold, this back of the envelope calculation says 1200 MR per hour. Now, I'm immediately suspect when you make a rough calculation, you make a measurement, and they're the same. That means one of them's wrong, because it doesn't work like that. And NRC at headquarters evidently got real bent out of shape. Go, oh my God, you got what he calculated on the back of the envelope, and immediately they start yelling, we got to evacuate. Oh, we got better moving than dead, and you know, an awful lot of stuff. This is like 8 o'clock in the morning, and a lot of us hadn't had a decent sleep for about 2 days. And anyway, they're jumping around, and they call up saying, hey, we think you ought to evacuate, blah, 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 blah. And the foot soldier that called us, we said, well, you know, whose idea is this? And they were saying, go out to 10 miles. And I said, whose idea is this? And this individual would not name names nor let us talk to them. And they also called Pima. And Pima didn't know who this was that was calling. They know the words NRC, but they don't know people's, you know, the names of anyone who would have cause to call them. So they called us and said, hey, what's this stuff from NRC? And very shortly thereafter, we decided, you know, they're calling for something that is not making a lot of sense. And we have to turn this off because it's not true.
But didn't they call Dauphin County directly? Does I remember? Wasn't there a call from the NRC?
I have to think
to
a minute
Dauphin County? Seems to me that's what really
No,
caused the panic.
Pima called Kevin Malloy, who was the county director, and they said to him, get your ducks in a row because we may have something for you to do here. So Kevin got on I guess he commandeered the EBS station saying, oh, we may have something to do here, and I want you to, and he did his standard, you may have to evacuate broadcast, which says take your walkers and your pills and a change of underwear and, you know, the things that people frequently leave behind when they have to evacuate, and that gives them real heartache 2 hours later because I don't have my pills. Anyway, Kevin has gone through this, and at that point, that message sort of hit the airwaves with a splat. And I didn't know that this was going out of the county. But in the meantime, Jaruski and Dornsife and I had decided this is a crock. So I was supposed to hold the fort, and I thought, why me, Lord? Yeah. And Jaruski walked over to the governor's office, and I gave Dornsife my car to go to Pima. To this day, I don't know where he found a place to park up there. I don't know. And they both were saying, hey, you don't want to do this. But by this time, the governor had talked to Chairman Hendry, and Hendry is saying, well, you know, if I had a wife and blah, 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 and preschool children, blah, blah. And from that came the edict saying pregnant women and preschool children should evacuate. And Hershey Medical School arranged for the evacuees to go to Hershey Arena. They were put up here. Anybody who didn't have another place to go in terms of pregnant women and preschool children. Now, this wasn't the most enlightened way of doing an evacuation order, because the last thing you want to do is break up families, and you have a terrible time explaining to a mother how come her 4-year-old needs to evacuate but her 7-year-old doesn't. Now you're being a little too, when you only take portions of the population and tell them to do something that's sociologically is not the thing to do. I don't pretend to be a sociologist, but man, you can sit back and watch some mischief in action in some of this. But anyway, with the around late in the morning is when the evacuation thing went out. Also business about, you know, get in the house for the time being and close the windows, and there, you know, there's really nothing going on, but since the Fed is saying, you know, gee whiz, you ought to do something, you'd be in deep doo-doo if you didn't do something, and then something else crept, you know, blindsided you. Anyway, and then things kind of marched along. That first weekend, that was the weekend of the bubble, it was contended by a number of engineering types that a bubble of hydrogen had formed on top of the fuel within the reactor vessel, and that there was one school of thought that said there's oxygen there also. And the hydrogen in oxygen explosion envelope is huge, and there are very few ratios of those that aren't explosive. So they were afraid that somehow a spark was going to get introduced into this and go blooey. But in the meantime, they're using a bleed and feed tactic, you know, taking water with a mixture of whatever gases and junk in it, get the gases out of it and shove it back in. That's bleed and feed.
They had oxygen meters. In other words, the utility knew that there was no oxygen.
Well,
it's just
that's only the utilities, Sidney. What should they know? But, you know, half of NRC is saying, oh, you got an oxygen problem. And the other half is saying, no, you don't. And after the accident, Dornsife and I, we're mischievous children. But in Gladstone's Introduction to Nuclear Engineering book, it's copyrighted in the 50s. And we found a line in there that says you don't have oxygen because of a hydrogen overpressure. And here, you know, this was stated in this text as if, duh, doesn't everyone know this? And we seriously considered burning off those pages in the faceplate and putting it in a plain brown wrapper and sending it to NRC. Evil, mischievous children that we are. But anyway, eventually the bubble issue went away. For years later, there were minor civil divisions around TMI that still had 20-mile evacuation plans, because that weekend, some people running around saying bubble, 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 blow up, bluey, you know, fuel flying through the trees sort of thing. Once you make a plan for 20 miles, you tend to keep it until you have good reason to do otherwise. But eventually, they had some other problems too. With there was an airline strike on at the time, and I think maybe a trucking strike. But there was a need to get a lot of lead bricks into Shield to recombiner, and it there was a lot of uproar with that too, but
National Guard did that
yeah.
at night.
Mm-hmm.
Middle
Oh,
of the night.
there were weird things that went on. There's, I don't remember in great detail the goings on, but with,
I think it came from the Bureau of Standards. The reason I know that is they've been trying to get rid of these cobalt-60 contaminated bricks for 30 years.
yeah, and then,
And
you
this
know,
was-
when you're gonna
and they
put
got
it
rid
in a
of all the
reactor building, man,
contaminated
it's a good place to put it.
And they ended up at TMI.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it, because I knew the guys down there, and they couldn't get anybody to take these bricks
Mm-hmm.
for years. And then
Yeah, well,
all
they
of a
had an
sudden,
odd tanker from somebody in Texas too. There are funny little vignettes lying all over the place, but.
so anyway, this was good for job security for you for how many years? A lot of years.
Probably into the late 80s. In 1980, we got into the issue of, gee whiz, we had to vent the Krypton 85, you know, the aged atmosphere of the reactor building from the accident. All you have left is a lot of Krypton 85 and some other odds and ends that are filterable. But after an awful lot of uproar, it was finally decided, oh yeah, we'll put this stuff out at a known rate so that, you know, we know what we're putting out, we know where it goes. And for instance, during the eventual venting in the summer of 80, if a thunderstorm came up, they had to stop venting. Now, a thunderstorm has this wonderful unstable atmosphere. You know, you can really mix under those conditions, but they couldn't release them because they had no way of knowing where it was really going. But anyway, we, at the behest, I forget whose idea it was, we got in cahoots with Penn State and Department of Energy. It was Department of Energy money, and they decided we're going to do a community monitoring program as a way of kind of reducing the fear factor on this maneuver, which is basically innocuous. But by this time, the general public isn't trusting anybody. So starting in the late winter of 80,